They said no one lasts more than a few nights in Shamsi Haveli. Some disappeared, some went mad, and one poor girl named Noor walked straight into it, with nothing but 2 pieces of bread and a copy of the Quran. She wasn't looking for love, she wasn't chasing ghosts, she just needed work. But what she found inside those crumbling walls wasn't just a job, it was a centuries-old secret, a powerful being who had waited in silence for her. They say the Jinn inside that Haveli had once been an angel among his kind, until love shattered him, until rejection turned his light into fire. And now, after hundreds of years, he finally found someone he couldn't resist. But Noor wasn't an ordinary girl. She had something no spell could break, no gold could buy, and when she said no, what followed was not just terrifying, it was divine. Before the haunted Haveli, before the Jinn, before the whispers in the walls, there was just a girl. Her name was Noor. She lived in a cracked, mud-walled house at the edge of a quiet village called Narobada, name that ironically meant the land of light. Though life there was anything but, her home had no electricity, no gas, no steady income, just a rusted roof that leaked when it rained, and a mother who hadn't walked in 4 years. But if you had seen Noor walking down the village path in the early morning, head covered with a worn dupatta, eyes lowered, barefoot in the dusty you might have paused, not because of her beauty, although that was undeniable. It was something else, something still about her, like she belonged to another time, or maybe another realm. She had the kind of face that carried silence, a softness that hadn't yet been ruined by the world. But her eyes betrayed a depth. They didn't sparkle like most beautiful girls. They burnt quietly, patiently, with something unexplainable, like a candle that had been burning in a dark room far too long. Noor's days were always the same. She would rise before sunrise, often with her stomach empty, but her spirit full. The call of Fajr echoed through the village mosque, and while many turned in their sleep, Noor would wrap a thin shawl around herself and lay out a worn prayer mat in the corner of the room. Her mother, Fatima Bibi, too weak to sit, would lie in bed and watch as her daughter bowed to the unseen. Noor prayed like someone who wasn't asking for miracles. She prayed like someone who already had everything because she had her faith after Salah. She would open a small hand-stitched copy of the Quran, the only gift her late father had ever left her hand, recite. Her lips barely moved, but her eyes would glisten at certain verses, as if those words, written centuries ago, had somehow been written for her. Then began the daily struggle. There was never enough water. The pots were cracked. The roof was caving in. Some nights, they went to sleep hungry. Some days, the only sound in the house was her mother coughing and Noor whispering, "Inshallah, Sab Thik, Hoga, if Allah wills, all will be well." But no one in the village ever heard her complain. Not once. People offered her shortcuts. A local landlord's son once said, "You're too pretty to suffer like this. Just marry me, I'll take care of your mother." A shopkeeper offered her work as a maid, but only if she agreed to please the master when needed. But every time Noor answered the same way, "What my Rab has written for me is enough. I won't sell my soba. I will not trade my patience for ease." And somehow, that made people uncomfortable. Her strength, her refusal, her faith, it was too much for a world that had long stopped believing. One day, an old woman in the village approached her, a hunched figure with cloudy eyes and a voice that trembled like dry leaves. "There's a Haveli," she said, "at the edge of the forest. No one's lived there for years, but its owners come once in a while from the city. They need someone to clean it. Big place. You'll be paid well. Noor hesitated. Everyone in Noorabad had heard of Shamsi Haveli. It was a place children dared each other to run past at night. A place elders crossed themselves when they mentioned. A place of disappearances, whispers, and shadows. But then she looked at her mother, her frail face, her thinning wrists, her breath that rattled more each day, and she made a decision. If there are devils in that place, she whispered under her breath, then I'll go with my Lord's name. No shadow can stand against his light. The next morning, Noor packed a small bundle, 2 pieces of roti, a bottle of water, and her Quran. She tied the scarf tightly around her head, kissed her mother's hand, and walked toward the path that led out of the village. She didn't look back. Her mother watched her from the doorway, eyes glassy, heart heavy, whispering a silent dua under her breath. Ya Allah, protect her. If she returns, let her return in peace. And if she doesn't, let her be with you. The villagers watched her too, some in pity, some in fear, some in awe, because they all knew no one returned the same from Shamsi Haveli, if they returned at all, but Noor. Noor was not going as a victim. She was going as a servant of Allah, and if something dark waited inside those walls, it would have to face a light that had never once flickered, no matter how strong the wind blew. She didn't know then that someone was already watching her, not from the trees, not from the bushes, but from the cracks in the Haveli's ancient walls, from the shadows that had waited not for a trespasser, but for her. Shamsi Haveli stood at the edge of the forest like a forgotten king, its grandeur long faded, its silence heavier than time itself. The gate was rusted, the paint on its doors peeled off in thick layers, and vines crawled up the cracked marble like veins on old skin. The windows were clouded, some shattered, and yet there was something alive about it, something breathing behind the silence. Noor stood at the entrance, her hand gently resting on the cold iron gate. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, Bismillah, and stepped in. The air inside was colder, still, as if it hadn't moved in years. Her footsteps echoed in a way that made the walls seem too tall, too close, too watchful. The Haveli had once been the pride of Nawab Zanuel, a bidden Shamsia man whose wealth was legendary and whose only daughters was once the most talked about beauty of the region. But the tale of her tragic death had stained every brick of that mansion. Some said she was forced to marry a man she didn't love. Some said she locked herself in the top room and never came down. Others whispered that she was found hanging from the grand chandelier, her face still twisted in rage. And from that day, nothing was ever the same. Servants disappeared. Some were found days later in the forest, babbling nonsense. Others were never found at all. It was said the mansion had become a resting place for jinns, imprisoned there through dark rituals performed long ago. Locals swore they heard a woman crying at night, saw a figure in white moving past the upstairs windows, even though no one lived there anymore. But Noor, brave in faith but cautious in spirit, walked deeper inside. Each room was a time capsule, dusty portraits, shattered chandeliers, broken furniture covered in thick sheets. It felt like the Haveli was frozen in grief as she cleaned. She whispered Quranic verses under her breath, her voice steady, her fingers trembling only slightly. And in that moment, something stirred, not outside, not around her, but within the walls. He had felt her. not as a stranger or an intruder, but like a long-awaited call had finally been answered. That night, as Noor lay in one of the servant rooms on a thin mattress, she woke to the sound of soft weeping echoing through the halls. She sat up, heart pounding, but instead of fear, she whispered, Rebbi nos, Malikun nas, ila ahun nas. The mansion grew quiet again, but someone had heard her, and he would not forget that voice. Long before Shamsi Haveli was covered in dust, before Zuleka's screams became echoes in its corridors, there was a Jinn unlike any other. His name was Kamil. He wasn't born from smoke and shadow like most of his kind. Kamil was once among the Ruhani Jannat spiritual beings, known for their piety, their light, and their closeness to the divine. He dwelt not in ruins or tombs, but in places of worship, whispering praises to the Almighty as angels descended. He was destined for Jannah, but like all beings with a heart, Kamil was tested. His test came in the form of a girl, not a woman of beauty or wealth, but one who wept quietly during Tahajjud, recited Quran with broken voice, and gave her last morsel to a bird perched at her window. Her name has long been forgotten, but for Kamil, she was everything. He didn't seek her out. He stumbled upon her one night in a forest clearing, her head bowed, whispering a dua under the stars. From that moment on, he returned every night, hiding in silence, watching her pray, listening to the sound of her heart through the rhythm of her tears. His love for her was not carnal. It was spiritual, so deep, so consuming, it made him forget what he was, forget what he was meant to be. But the girl was promised to someone else, a simple, kind-hearted man, and when her wedding day came, Kamil broke. He wept, he screamed, and then he did something no Ruhani Jinn had done before. He questioned his creator, Ya Rab, you placed this love in me. Why would you keep it from me? Why give me a heart if it was never meant to beat for her? That one moment of shikayah, of complaint, shattered the light inside him. He fell from grace, not like Iblis with pride, but with heartbreak, banished from the realms of the pious. Kamil wandered the earth, broken, lost, burning dot. Eventually, something darker called to him. He found his way to Shamsi Haveli, drawn by the lingering pain left behind by Zuleka's death. And that's where he stayed, not as a demon, not quite as a Jinn, but as a wounded soul, drifting in cursed silence. Centuries passed, many entered, none touched his heart, until one day a barefoot girl with tired eyes and the Quran in her hands crossed the threshold. No, he watched her from the cracks in the wall, listened to her tilawat echo through the empty halls, and something inside him stirred. Not lust, not obsession, but that same unbearable longing. This time, he whispered to himself, I won't let her go. Noor never saw him, but he saw everything. Each time she walked past the cracked mirrors of Shamsi Haveli, her reflection seemed to linger, just a second longer than it should. When she whispered verses while sweeping the dust from ancient tiles, a chill ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from something unseen. Listening. Kamil had become a shadow within the Haveli, moving through its forgotten passages, watching her with an intensity that didn't belong to this world. She wasn't just a guest anymore, she was the heartbeat of the mansion, and that heartbeat had become his obsession at first. He kept his distance. He watched silently when she cried for her mother's health. He hovered unseen as she folded her prayer mat, lips moving in soft remembrance. Every act of faith pulled him deeper into torment. He wanted to speak, to reach out, but he knew his touch would terrify her, so he chose something else. Gifts, a pouch of gold placed beside her mattress, medicine bottles neatly arranged on the old table, new linens on her bed that hadn't been there the night before. Each time Noor discovered them, her heart trembled not with gratitude, but with fear. She wasn't naive. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't human. And one night, as she sat beneath the broken chandelier and recited Surah Al-Baqarah, the air in the room thickened, oppressive, electric. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift. She clutched her Quran tighter. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin. Camille felt it. Not just the rejection, the barrier. She was building a wall not with bricks, but with faith. But obsession doesn't reason. It doesn't retreat. In Camille's eyes, Noor wasn't denying him. She was denying what fate had chosen. He had given her what she prayed for: wealth, comfort, ease. And still, she turned away. Why? Because he was a jinn. Because he was unseen. His love wasn't about possession, not yet, but it had started to twist from admiration into need. Each time she refused his invisible generosity, Camille's silence grew heavier, his presence darker. His soul, already shattered, began to fracture. Even more, no art, unaware of the growing storm behind the walls, continued to cling to her faith. Her mother's condition was still fragile, and every day in that mansion felt colder than the last. But she remained steady. What she didn't know was that she wasn't fighting poverty anymore. She was fighting something ancient, something that once prayed alongside angels, and now prayed only for her. Far from the haunted corridors of Shamsi Habaleh, in a crumbling clay hut at the edge of Nurabad, an old woman lay silently on her bed. Her body was weak, her hands trembled, but her heart was unshakable. Fatima Bibi hadn't heard from Noor in days. She knew her daughter had gone to earn an honest living, but the silence was unbearable. Every creak of the door made her heart leap. Every breeze that passed through the torn curtain carried her daughter's name. Fatima Bibi wasn't just a mother. She was a guardian of dua, and now all she had left was that prayer each night. As her bones ached and her breath grew thin, she turned her face toward the sky and whispered, Ya Rab. She didn't know about KML. She didn't know about the strange gold or the whispering shadows that watched Noor in her sleep. But a mother feels, and something in her soul screamed that her daughter was walking through a test far deeper than poverty. That night, Fatima Bibi didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She wept. She trembled. And then, she did what only a mother of true faith could do. She placed her hand over her heart, raised her trembling fingers to the sky and said, that one sentence tore through the night like lightning dot, and somewhere beyond the skies, it was heard in Shamsi Havaleh. At that exact moment, Noor was praying. She had just finished reciting Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Anas, her eyes heavy, her body tired. But before she could drift into sleep, she felt a lightness in the air, as if the room had been washed clean. She turned toward the window. A beam of white moonlight filtered through the cracked glass, and in that moment, she felt it in her chest. Her mother had prayed, and her Lord had answered far behind the walls. Camille froze. He felt a power enter the mansion unlike anything before, not from Quran alone, but from a mother's broken plea for the first time. The darkness inside him recoiled, not in fear, but in realization. Noor was not alone. She was never alone. She was wrapped in something. No Jinn could penetrate a mother's love, backed by heaven's mercy. And from that night on, everything began to shift. Noor thought she was alone, but every moment of peace she carved out in Shamsi Haveli was being watched, and every act of worship she performed felt like a blow to something hidden in the walls. Kamir was no longer just a distant shadow. He was consumed. The same Quranic verses that once soothed him now pierced him. Her tasbihs were like arrows. Her tears, once beautiful, now felt like rejection. Every time she whispered, "Ya Allah, only you are enough for me," he felt a wall rise higher between them, and that wall drove him mad. He had given her everything: gold, comfort, safety, but she had chosen prayer mats over treasure, sujud over comfort, and Allah over him. To him, that wasn't faith, that was cruelty. One night, Noor was reciting Surah Al-Baqarah in her room. The candles around her flickered, then went out. A strange pressure filled the air as if something was pushing against her chest. The room grew cold. The shadows thickened, and then she heard it. A whisper, not in her ears, but in her soul. "Why do you refuse me, Noor? I can give you everything. Why do you run?" She opened her eyes. Her lips quivered, but not from fear. Instead, she recited louder, "Qul-Auzu by Rabbil, Falak, Kul, Auzu by Rabbinas." The air snapped. An unseen force howled, not from anger, but from pain. Kamil, from the hidden corners of the Haveli, screamed silently. Her rejection had become a wound, and now her verses were salt in it. But Noor wasn't chanting out of defiance. She was praying out of protection. She could feel something lurking, something that loved her, yet sought to own her. Something desperate, broken, and dangerous. She didn't understand what it was, only that her Lord was her only refuge. Meanwhile, back in the village, Hafiz Ibrahim had begun to worry. His instincts, sharpened by decades of faith and divine insight, told him that struggle was no longer just physical or emotional, it was spiritual warfare. And it was time someone stood beside her, not just with du'as, but with action. The next morning, Noor opened her door and found a small leather pouch. Inside was a tiny tasbih and a note written in delicate, careful ink. "Whenever the darkness tightens, recite Ya Hafizu 33 times, every day, every night." She looked around. There was no one, but the message was clear. She was not alone, and the battle had begun. The silence of Shamsi Haveli was broken not by screams, but by something subtler, verses soft at first, then stronger, echoing through its haunted halls like fire burning through darkness. Hafiz Ibrahim had arrived. Clutching his Quran and a bottle of Rouhani water, he stood before the rattan gate. His white beard moved gently in the wind, and his eyes scanned the twisted architecture, now visibly bruised by something unseen. But he didn't flinch. His steps were slow, but every one of them was grounded in certainty. This was no ordinary visit. He had heard Noor's fears, seen the signs, and felt the shift in the air. Something unnatural had latched onto her, something claiming to love but acting like it owned. And Hafiz Ibrahim knew what that meant. The Jinn was no longer lurking, it was attaching, binding, dangerously close to crossing a line. Inside, Noor felt the moment Hafiz entered. The air heavy for days suddenly lifted. Her breath came easier. Her heart steadied. And somewhere behind the walls, Camille screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration, a groan that pulsed through stone and shadow, like a wounded beast being cornered. Hafiz began his work immediately. No dramatic rituals, no fire, just Quran. Surah Baqarah Yatal Kursi. Surah Jinn. He walked through every room, letting the verses settle into the cracks, fill the air, and drive out whatever hid within. Noor followed silently, clutching her tasbih, her eyes welling with tears, not of fear, but of relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt like this place belonged to her prayers again, not to a ghost, but Camille. He wasn't retreating, he was. Bleeding. Every verse felt like betrayal. Every echo of Allah felt like Noor turning her back. You asked for help, Noor, and you brought someone to banish me. That night, he showed her his pain not in words, but in dreams. A burning mansion, a broken voice, a shadow kneeling beside her, whispering, I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to be near you. She woke up, shaking, but not confused, because now she understood. This wasn't just haunting, it was longing, twisted, broken, dangerous longing, and love. When it forgets limits, becomes obsession, and obsession, when given power, becomes possession. Hafiz Ibrahim, sensing the battle had entered its final stage, handed Noor a small vial of water he had prayed over for 41 nights. Sprinkle this in every corner, and tonight you will not sleep. You will pray. Noor nodded. Her voice was low, but steady. I'm ready. As the sun dipped behind the Haveli, the stage was set, not for horror, but for reckoning. Light had entered, and the shadows had no choice but to face it. The sun had vanished behind the hills of Nurabad, and with it, all warmth seemed to drain from Shamsi Haveli. That night was unlike any other. A dense stillness hung over the walls. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, as if the Haveli itself sensed that something ancient was coming to an end. No, Or stood in the middle of the grand hall, the Quran open in front of her, candlelight dancing in her eyes. She had completed Wadhu, her heart firm, her soul ready. In every corner of the Haveli, she had sprinkled Hafiz Ibrahim's water, not out of fear, but out of faith. She wasn't praying for safety anymore. She was praying for closure. Above her, the old chandelier trembled ever so slightly. Behind her, the shadows deepened, and then she felt it. He had arrived. Not with flames, not with fury, but with silence heavy enough to bend the air. Kamil was there, not in form, but in presence. Not to frighten her, but to plead. Noor, I loved you the only way I knew how. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes and began to recite Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best disposer of affairs. The room shook, windows rattled, walls groaned, and somewhere in the distance, a voice not human, not demonic, but lost cried out in anguish. Camille's pain exploded like thunder in a bottle. Years of longing, centuries of waiting, all denied with a single word, Allah. He screamed not out of hate, but of heartbreak, not because she rejected him, but because her love belonged to someone greater. I gave you everything. Why am I not enough? Her answer was simple, quiet, and final. Because you're not my Rab. My heart belongs to the one who created even you. In that moment, something snapped. The shadows recoiled. The candles roared to life. And Camille, once mighty, once ethereal, was pushed back by nothing more than the power of remembrance. Outside the Haveli, Hafiz Ibrahim stood under the old neem tree, his hand raised, his lips trembling in dua. Allah, let truth triumph over obsession. Let light defeat whatever darkness hides in that house. Suddenly, the air grew still. The sky seemed to clear, and a strange, glowing peace settled over the Havli.Kamil was gone. Not banished, not destroyed, just freed. Noor opened her eyes, and for the first time, the silence was pure. She smiled through her tears, not because the Jinn was gone, but because her heart had survived something most souls never confront. She hadn't just fought a spirit, she had defended her faith, her dignity, and her choice to belong only to Allah. And that night, the heavens had answered back.